What's up, everybody? Tom Pelissero here with Phil Mackey. Talked about the pitchers yesterday, Phil. Let's look at what's going to happen around the diamond for the Minnesota Twins in 2013, because certainly you can start in center field. There are a lot of changes.
Yeah, and center field is wide open, and the Twins didn't go into the offseason expecting that to be the case. They expected to trade either Span or Revere. Once Span went, the Phillies picked up the phone and said, hey, we're interested in Revere, and we'll give you one of our best pitching prospects and Vance Worley. Any GM in baseball would have and should have taken that trade if you're Terry Ryan, coming off almost 200 losses the last two seasons. So now it's Aaron Hicks, Joe Benson, Darren Mastriani competing for that starting job. And it's interesting that on Talking Twins, Ron Gardenhire told us a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that when the possibility arose of Span and Revere both being traded, Gardenhire went to Terry Ryan and said, I want Aaron Hicks to have a legitimate shot at being my starting center fielder. So here's where it gets a little bit complicated. Mastriani is clearly the leader in the clubhouse for this job because he's the most experienced, even though he only has about 200 career Major League plate appearances.
But he played a lot last year.
Yeah, and a lot as a defensive replacement, stole 20-plus bases. So you sort of know what you're getting in Mastriani. Joe Benson, who was as recently as last year a top 100 prospect according to Baseball America, ranked right about where Aaron Hicks and Oswaldo Arcia are ranked right now this year. Joe Benson's out of minor league options after this season. So you have to find out what you have in Joe Benson, or he winds up being exposed to other teams who are likely going to take a flyer on a guy who has 5 tools. So that's where most people probably think it's between Mastriani and Hicks, because Hicks is the highly touted prospect. But Benson was the highly touted prospect before injuries and a disaster season last year. And at some point, you got to find out what you have in him.
What about at the other corner outfield spot? Certainly Willingham's locked in left field. It sounds as if they want to try to get a lot of at-bats for Chris Parmelee in right.
Yes, Chris Parmelee enters spring training as the starting right fielder. And even if he has a really bad spring training, which I don't necessarily foresee, I think that's his job. It's his time. It's been a year and a half since he was called up from Double-A and tore the cover off the ball in September. And he's really, if you go back and look at him as kind of a wiry, and he's always had a little bit thicker base, but more of a wiry, strikeout-prone hitter early in the minor leagues, and he has developed into a really patient hitter, very disciplined.
Hasn't shown a lot of power, though, through his track record.
No, he hasn't. He's one of those guys, scouts will tell you, has more power maybe in the next few years to give than he's shown, and you can kind of see that. When he drives a ball, he drives it, but if Chris Parmelee can sort of settle in, whether he's playing right field or first base, as a doubles hitter who can give you 18 to 22 home runs, good on-base percentage, that's what the Twins would really... I would think anyone would take that. But the problem is, with Parmelee in right field and Willingham in left field, whoever plays center field is going to run 3 marathons every single night tracking down fly balls. There's not much range, but... remember 2010, Delman, Young, Kubel, and Kadire were the corner outfielders. And
not a lot of speed there either.
That's a team that wound up just mashing their way to 94 wins. Not that this team's going to do that either, but yeah.
Joe Mauer, the catcher, Justin Morneau at first base, Trevor Plouffe at third, and Terry Ryan said something at the Twins media luncheon a couple of weeks ago I thought was interesting, which was he's going to trust that the first half Trevor Plouffe last year was the real guy, and the second half was something else. They want to rely on the fact that Plouffe has shown that he can produce at that level. If you look at what happened in the second half of the season for a guy who defensively continues to have a long way to go, you'd be in some trouble, but they also don't have a whole lot of options over there.
Yeah, Terry Ryan is going to trust, but most of us are going to probably say hope is the word that he could substitute with trust. And I would say more importantly than Plouffe being the monster offensive power hitter that he was for that 2-month stretch, he was the best power hitter in baseball. It was unbelievable how on the ball he was. I would say more important than that is him shoring up his defense, just based on this pitching staff. This pitching staff is going to have, with Kevin Correa, Mike Pelfrey, and Scott Diamond for sure, and even a lot of the other pitchers on the staff in the bullpen, it's going to be a super ground ball heavy pitching staff. And Trevor Plouffe was rated by any measure you look at, any advanced metric, errors, anything you want to look at, your own eyes, was one of the worst defensive third basemen in the league last year. So even if he can just be a break-even average defender at third base and hit 20 home runs for you, that would be huge. But you have to be more consistent. You can't explode for 2 months and then be completely off the radar the other 4 months of the season.
It sounds like they'd prefer Jamie Carroll to be more in a utility role, a backup role, take some starts at second base, take some over at shortstop. they're thinking Brian Dozier is going to be able to make the transition from shortstop to second base. Terry Ryan, though, was ticked off at Brian Dozier last year. I remember there was one game where he had kicked a couple of balls. I think it was in an afternoon game. They just got absolutely blown out of the building, and Terry Ryan was furious with him. We talked to Terry about that at the Diamond Awards, too. The fact that sometimes guys come up and they get caught up in not even so much the nightlife or anything like that, but just all the stuff about
hey, I'm a big leaguer now.
Got to get tickets for people, got to do all these other sorts of things rather than taking care of business. Brian Dozier, defensively, was a disaster.
And there is this culture that maybe even the players, some of the players aren't aware of, that's sort of crept in the last couple of years. It goes back to the Valencias and the Luke Hugheses, this culture of Twins minor leaguers who came up on losing teams, who really just sort of got used to being paid to play baseball without really caring as much compared to the guys who came up 10 years ago, without really caring as much about winning and getting better. Not to say that Brian Dozier doesn't care about winning or getting better, but there's a difference between being happy being a major leaguer and loving the process of getting better.
Sure.
And Brian Dozier goes in as, even though Terry would like you to think that he's got to beat Jamie Carroll out, I mean, it would be stupid if all things were equal, if they didn't give Brian Dozier.
He's basically said Dozier's going to be the guy if he can show he is the guy.
But it was interesting, too, at the Diamond Awards, somebody told a story about Brian Dozier going down to visit Josh Willingham, and this was more a story about Josh Willingham and how hard Josh Willingham works. But Dozier went to visit Josh Willingham in Alabama this offseason, and it was said that Dozier was just blown away by how hard Josh Willingham works. Well, I'm sure that that's somebody putting a feeling in words in Dozier's mouth, but should you really be blown away by how hard someone works? No, go work that hard and do what you've done in A-ball and Double-A and translate that by working hard and being a good Major League second baseman.
So if Dozier and or Carroll fill in the second base spot, then at shortstop, Pedro Florimon, I know that Terry Ryan had said that's the athlete you look for there, and what he's talking about is a pitching staff that is going to, in theory, induce a lot of ground balls. And with the guys they've turned, think of how many different shortstops they've gone through over the past 3 years, back to in 2010 when they had J.J. Hardy, and you thought, this is a guy who has a chance to really lock in and be that guy going forward. He deals with the wrist injuries. He ends up getting traded away and then goes and has a great season the year after. But they've gone through Tsuyoshi Nishioka, and they've rolled through Plouffe there, and they've done Dozier. They've had a bunch of different things.
Ground balls rolled through Tsuyoshi Nishioka, too.
They haven't been able to lock down on somebody there, so now Florimon gets his chance, and if he flames out in spring training, maybe it's somebody else.
Yeah, Florimon, the thing is, Florimon is 26 years old, 25, 26 years old, and hasn't hit at any level. Like, literally has not hit above about 260 at any level going back to rookie ball. Now, for what the Twins are looking for, if Parmalee hits, if Willingham hits, if you find a center fielder who can hit, you don't need your shortstop to be Jose Reyes, to be Hanley Ramirez. And I'll go back to what I said about Plouffe. The most important thing with the shortstop, who sees more ground balls than anyone on the diamond, you have to be a top defender, and that's what Florimon was. As bad of a hitter as he was, and as bad as a hitter as he's been in the minor leagues, he was one of the best defensive shortstops and one of the rangiest defensive shortstops in the game last year. So what does he have to hit? He get on base at near a 300 clip and hit 250 and move guys around. If you play elite defense, you can probably get away with that.
Between him, Dozier, Carroll, Mastriani, I don't know if there's somebody who jumps out at you as being the new answer in the leadoff spot either, after they've really had two guys, Denard Span and Ben Revere, who have held that down for quite a while.
And with that said, the uncertainty up the middle period, with you don't know who your shortstop, second baseman, or center, maybe your three most important positions outside of catcher, you're right. And so with the uncertainty at the top of the order, for me, you have to put Joe Mauer either in the number 2 hole, or I know it sounds weird, but in the leadoff spot. You need, before you can worry about speed and moving guys over and playing small ball,
you need someone to get on base.
Yes, someone to get on base, even if they're not that fast, and Joe Mauer can do that. So at the very least, Joe Mauer should be the number 2 hitter.
He's Phil, I'm Tom, full Twins coverage at 1500ESPN.com. Spring training starting next week. Phil's going down in a few weeks. Judd Zolgad will be there from the start for us.
Hastiness.
We'll
you wearing the
see
same shirt as last video, by the way?
We may or may not have made these back-to-back.